Okay, we're going to talk about lesson 4-7 today. Use CPCTC to prove parts of triangles are congruent. CPCTC is an abbreviation for the phrase, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. It can be used as a justification in a proof after you have proven two triangles congruent. Remember, side, 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 angle, angle, side, angle, 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 side, and hypotenuse leg are postulates that you use corresponding parts to prove triangles congruent. When we use the CPCTC, we have to first prove the triangles are congruent, then we can go back and say the corresponding parts are congruent. Okay, so let's look at this first one here. A and B are on the edge of the ravine. What is A and B? Okay, we've got two triangles here. And we've got this segment congruent to this segment because they're both 15 miles. This segment is congruent to this segment because they're both 10 miles. I've got this angle congruent to this angle because they're both vertical angles. So what we have here are vertical angles. And we have two pairs of corresponding sides congruent. So we can say the triangles are congruent because of side, angle, side. That angle is the included angle between those sides. Once we say those triangles are congruent, we can say that AB equals 18 miles because of CPCTC. Once we prove the triangle's congruent, then these corresponding sides right here have to be congruent. All right, same thing. I'm going to be quiet and see if y'all can work this one on your own. All right, now we're going to do a proof here. Segment YW bisects segment XZ. So what information does that give us? It lets us know that XW is congruent to ZW. Segment XY is congruent to YZ. Okay, so we're trying to prove angle XYW is congruent to angle ZYW. That's what we're trying to prove. Okay, so in order to prove those triangles congruent, we need to prove that all three sides are congruent because we have no angle measures. We have two pairs of sides congruent, but what do you know about this right here? You know that third side is congruent because of your reflexive property. So once we prove the triangle's congruent, then we can prove parts of those triangles, the corresponding parts are congruent, and these angles will be congruent. So let's look at this. Segment YW bisects segment XZ. That is given. That information lets us know that segment XW is congruent to ZW. That's definition of bisector. segment XY is congruent to segment YZ, given. We know that YW, segment YW is congruent to segment YW. That's your reflexive property. So we've got all three corresponding sides congruent. So we can now say that triangle XYW is congruent to triangle ZYW because of side, side, side. Once we prove the triangle is congruent, we can show that the corresponding sides and angles are congruent. So angle XYW is going to be congruent to angle ZYW because of your CPCTC. Okay, another proof here. Segment PR bisects QPS. So what that tells us is this angle is congruent to this angle. Segment PR also bisects angle QRS. That lets us know that this angle is congruent to this angle. We're trying to prove PQ congruent to PS. So we're trying to prove two segments congruent. So first we have to prove the two triangles congruent. Well, we've got two angles already congruent, so we need to start thinking maybe angle, angle, side, or angle, side, angle. You know that this segment is congruent because you're reflexive. That is the including side, so we're going to use angle, side, angle. So let's prove this. Segment PR bisects angle QPS and angle QRS, and this is given. What information does that let us know? That lets us know that angle QPS is congruent to angle SPR. That is your definition of bisector. Let's put angle bisector there. Also, angle QRP is congruent to angle SRP, definition of angle bisector. We can say that segment PR is congruent to segment PR. Why? Your reflexive property. So now we can say the triangles are congruent. Triangle QPR is congruent to triangle SPR. Why? Angle, side, angle. Once we prove the triangle is congruent, we can go back and say that the segment PQ is congruent to segment PS because of CPCTC. All right, another proof here. I'm going to be quiet and let you all work this one on your own. this one was a little tricky. Once you prove right here that your two triangles are congruent because of your angle side, you need to look to see how we can prove that these two segments are parallel. Well, we're looking at this one and this one. So what we need is for these alternate interior angles to be congruent, and they're congruent because they're alternate interior. Also, they're congruent because of the CPCTC. Therefore, we can say that these segments are parallel because of the converse of the alternate interior angles. Okay, we're going to stop here, and I'm going to go over the last question with you on part 2.